We're on item 5. Elisa Dobbins, come and talk to us about healthcare and retirement security. I know we've chatted about this before. You've been very patient with me, Elisa, when I've been trying to communicate about this item. Partly it's come up thinking about all the teachers in California who don't have healthcare in retirement. There's only a few districts I know of that do provide healthcare beyond retirement, and just the impact on retirement security. And so thank you so much for helping me wade through that issue, because I certainly think it's a huge issue for our members, and I look forward to, as always, and look at who we have here. So go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you, and you're quite welcome for the opportunity. I think it's been a really good opportunity to shed some light and hopefully increase understanding about the healthcare environment for our retired CalSTRS members. That was the intention of the piece. What we have done is we've submitted a written report, and we've created an opportunity. We have a special guest with us. I'll tell you more about Sudipto Banerjee, and I think our names are reversed. We could get up and shuffle if you want, but you know who we are, right?
Our staff is all over it. They're changing right now. So
Okay, perfect.
No problem.
Perfect. Oh. So we've put together this piece. We have a guest speaker to shed some light on the topic as well. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge Ruth Lattendorf. She was the lead researcher on the report that was submitted. She's not here in the room today because she's at home with her new baby. And I do want to express appreciation for the effort she put into this piece. Tom Buffalo and I are here to answer questions on the piece, provide more detail on data if you want that, and we'll do that after the more formal presentation, if that's the pleasure. So the formal introduction of Sudipto Banerjee. He will be presenting his findings on the risk of out-of-pocket healthcare expenses in retirement. And I think this piece is going to really create that bigger picture of what healthcare looks like and what the knowns and unknowns are for not just our members, but for anybody entering this period of their life. Dr. Banerjee is a senior manager of T. Rowe Price Associates and T. Rowe Price Investment Services. He is in a thought leadership role in the Retirement and Financial Education Group within the Enterprise Marketing Services Department. Prior to joining the firm in January of 2018, Dr. Banerjee served as a research associate with the Employee Benefit Research Institute. And that's where he conducted the research that he'll be talking about today. And really, when I became aware of his research, I saw a presentation on this topic and was quite grabbed and enamored with the information that was shared. Dr. Banerjee earned his PhD in economics from The Ohio State University. And in 2015, Next Avenue named Dr. Banerjee as one of the 50 influencers in aging for his analysis of the economic aspects of retirement. We met earlier this morning and had a good conversation about research, and I learned that Dr. Banerjee's broad area of research is specifically focused on how people spend money in retirement. And within this topic, Dr. Banerjee has conducted extensive research on healthcare and retirement. His research findings, I think, are very relevant to the questions that we've been asking about healthcare, and I'm honored that he could come today and share his research findings with us. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to you. I'll turn my mic off.
Thank you, Elisa, for inviting me, for giving me this opportunity to share the research with all of you. We have all heard from anecdotes and maybe from some statistics that healthcare is one of the biggest risks in retirement. And so hopefully I'll be able to show you some numbers which will speak to you to the nature of this risk. If we can go to the next clicker.
Right there, I think maybe
Oh, this is the one?
Try this.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
there you go.
okay, great. So I have listed the agenda, the topics that I'm planning to cover. If you want to move or spend more time in any of the particular topics, I'll be happy to do that. So the first, we'll talk a little bit about separating the health insurance premiums from other out-of-pocket healthcare expenses. And I'll show you that premiums are usually for large number of people. That will be the majority of their healthcare expenses throughout retirement. But that's not where most of the uncertainty or the risk is. The risk really lies in other out-of-pocket expenses, your co-pays, co-insurances, because they can vary a lot. Premiums are much more predictable in that sense. And then we'll talk about some research about how much people actually spend from age 70 until death. And as you will see from the numbers, that the biggest risk factor that jumps out is nursing home. So that's where we see the really big expenses lie, right? So we'll talk a little bit about nursing home expenses and what effect they have on household assets. The longer people stay, how that affect their portfolios. And then we'll also talk a little bit about gender differences, how nursing home looks different for men and women. And then we'll move to a slightly different topic, which is the use of different types of healthcare services in retirement. And so we will kind of show you that even within the out-of-pocket expenses, not everything is, part of it is predictable, what we call recurring healthcare expenses. So large part of that is pretty stable throughout retirement, and only a few services that are really uncertain and poses the highest risks for retirees. So we'll talk about that, which we call non-recurring healthcare expenses. And then finally, we'll show you how non-recurring healthcare expenses relates to marital status, and that has particular implications for women. Yeah, sure.
Healthcare services and the different types of healthcare service you'll talk about, because I just was talking to my mom Monday about she lives in a kind of retirement community, and she was saying that the community is experiencing challenges financially because so many more elderly people want to be taken care of in their home, like the home healthcare model and that's kind of changing. And then also memory care centers, and just how a lot of them aren't covered by even long-term care insurance. And so will you address some of those other?
Yeah. So you will see, specifically when we talk about nursing home expenses, nursing home, in many cases, that actually includes things like assisted care living. So you will see what percentage of people move into those kinds of facilities, and what percentage of people have to pay for that, because in many cases, they are paid by Medicare. Medicare has some requirements to pay for those kind of care, but it still pays for some percentage of people. And so you will see what percentage actually pays for that kind of care and how much that is.
I think it's interesting, the incidence rate of like Alzheimer's and some of these memory issues. From my dad just recently passed from this last year from dementia, and it was interesting how it doesn't cover memory loss or memory care, I'm sorry. And so we had to find a place for him to be cared for, but it was out of pocket and it was very costly.
Right.
I was shocked, and my mom's, insurance doesn't cover it. So I think it's some of those things that I wonder about for our members when you have unique health issues. So anyway.
Okay, so moving on to the first part is separating out the health insurance premiums from the other expenses. So here I have two separate estimates that I found from two separate studies, one done by Vanguard and Mercer. So here you can see that the dark blue portion, that's health insurance premiums. So the Vanguard Mercer numbers are for a typical 65-year-old woman in 2018. So 3,600 is in premiums, and the rest 1,600 in light blue portion. So that's the out-of-pocket component. And we have another estimate from Boston College. The numbers are slightly different because the Boston College estimate A, it's from 2014, and it also includes everyone 65-year-old plus who's receiving Social Security and Medicare. But the larger point that I want to make here, even when you look at both these two bars, you will see that about 2/3 of their annual healthcare expenses actually goes in terms of insurance payments. And only 1/3 is other out-of-pocket healthcare expenses. But as I'll show you later, that the light blue bar, the portion of the light blue bar, that's where the uncertainty is, and that's where the real risk is. So all the research that you will see from now onwards is actually only concerns about the light blue bar, which is out-of-pocket expenses. Okay. So this is the study that I mentioned. The full study is available online freely at the Employee Benefit Research Institute website. And so in this study, we looked at a sample of people ages 70, and we followed them over 20 years or until their death, and saw how much they spent on these type of healthcare expenses. I just want to very briefly talk a little bit about the data. So the data we used is from Health and Retirement Study. It is the largest nationally representative survey of older Americans, ages 50 and above. It's funded by the National Institute of Aging and Social Security Administration. It's really considered as the gold standard for aging research, and the same survey model has been adopted by countries in Asia and Europe to do this kind of research. Okay, and then particularly, just to give you a brief idea about the exact sample that we are using here, it's a group of people who were born before 1924 and were first interviewed in the year 1993. And since then, they have been interviewed. So initially, there were about 8,300 people in this group. And by 2014, 6,619 of them were already dead. And that's the sample that we used for this study. So for people, we definitely have the end point. So we kind of go back from their death and see how much they had spent during this 20-year period. Okay. And this is the list of services that we include when we calculate these costs. Hospital stays, nursing home stays, and nursing home stays, in many cases, that will include assisted living as well. And everything else is self-explanatory other than other healthcare services, which includes things like adult daycare centers, transportation costs for elderly and disabled, social workers, physical therapy, those kinds of things. Now, the numbers, as I already mentioned in the beginning, that they don't include the health insurance premiums, but also we don't have any data on over-the-counter medicine. So that's not included in these numbers. Okay, with that, and everything is adjusted for medical inflation and not just the CPI, because we know medical inflation is much higher than normal inflation. So all the numbers are in 2015 dollars. Okay, so this is the first chart that shows you the numbers. And on the left-hand side, we have age groups. So the age basically tells us the age at which the person died. Right, and so we have medians, which is the midpoints of 50% in the sample spent less than that number, and 50% spent more than that number. So I will focus, for the sake of time, just on one row, the bottom row, which is the longest lived elderly, so 95 and above. So people who died after the age of 95. So here you can see that the total is a little over $27,000. So from age 70 onwards, that's 50% of the sample spent less than that amount, and 50% spent more. So this is not really a catastrophic number, But what you will see is once you move to the right-hand side, the 90th percentiles and the 95th percentiles. So the 90th percentile means that 90% in the sample spent less than that amount. So for the 95 plus age group, it's about $172,000. So 10% in this sample spent more than $172,000 in healthcare expenses without premiums. And 95th percentile is $269,000, right? So the risk of out-of-pocket healthcare expenses is really concentrated for a few, but for them, the risk is really, really high. So for majority of people, it's moderate, but for some people, it's really high. And yeah, and the other thing that I also wanted to note here is that so this is out-of-pocket expenses that people had incurred, which means that they had the money to make these payments, right? So a lot of people don't have this money, and at some point they move into Medicaid when they exhaust their assets. So I don't have the chart in this presentation, but it's part of the paper that's available. So in this sample, about 11% were covered under Medicaid when the study began in 1993, right? And by the end, 33% or 1/3 of the sample were covered by Medicaid. So during this period, over this 20-year period, about 22% of the sample moved into Medicaid because they had exhausted all their assets. And so that's not always reflected in the high numbers. Okay. So that's the first slide. And then, so this one is basically, I have taken out the nursing home expenses from the previous slide. And that shows you how nursing home expenses can change the entire distribution. So now if you look at the 95 plus, the bottom row, then you see the median from 27,000 in the earlier slide, it drops down to close to 19,000. And if you look at the 90th percentiles and 95th percentiles, they drop down significantly. So the nursing home expenses, they are the leading factor that's driving the tail risk, what we call in healthcare expenses. Okay, so now we look a little more into the chances of moving into a nursing home and the chances of paying out of pocket. So in the entire sample, we had about 46% who had spent at least one night in a nursing home. But and only 23% in the sample had incurred an out-of-pocket expense for a nursing home stay. So basically half, so 46% had entered into a nursing home, but 23%, so about 50% had incurred an out-of-pocket expense. And that's because, as I mentioned in the beginning, in many cases, Medicare pays for nursing home expenses, but there are strict requirements for that. So for example, if a nurse, so it has to be in a skilled nursing home facility, and it cannot be, so most of the nursing homes are custodial care. And so Medicare does not pay for that. So it has to be in a skilled nursing home facility where medical services are administered, and it has to be followed, the nursing home visit has to be followed by a 3-night stay in a hospital. So under those, yeah, it has to be under at least 3 nights, and so only under those conditions Medicare pays for. So the first 20 days Medicare pays all of it, but after that for the next 80 nights there is a cost sharing. So per night I think it's about $167, and after 100 nights Medicare does not pay for it. So if you have the money, you have to pay out of pocket, or you have to move to Medicaid. Okay, so here we are looking at just nursing home expenses, only how much people spent only on nursing home expenses. So as you can see, the median is 0 because not 50% of the sample moves into a nursing home or had an out-of-pocket nursing home expense. But again, I'll focus only on the bottom row, the most long-lived elderly. So the 90th percentile is about $87,000, and the 95th percentile is at $175,000. So that's only nursing home. And here we are looking at everyone who went into a nursing home and who did not went into a nursing home. So because you can see that because from the median it's 0, right? But in the next slide, so we restricted the sample only to who went into a nursing home. And then you can see the numbers move up. So in that sample, the numbers, if you look at the 90th percentiles or the 95th percentiles, now they are much higher because now we are looking at only who had a nursing home expense. Okay. So I'll move from that. Okay, so now we are looking at some of the gender differences. And so we see in our sample about 38% of men had an overnight nursing home stay compared to almost 51% of women. So for women, the risk of moving into a nursing home is much higher than men. And so there are two reasons for that. A, we all know women are most likely to live longer. And the other factor that will come out in some of the later numbers is that women are also more likely to out-survive their spouses or partners, which means they're more likely to live as singles. And because spouses can act as caregivers, so at that point when women lose their spouses or partners, so at that point they need professional help. So that's another reason why women are at a higher risk. Okay. Okay, and so here we are looking at the nursing home expenses and the difference between men and women. Again, you can look through all the numbers. I'll focus just on the bottom row. So here we have in the medians, because it's 0 for the entire sample, it's 0 for men and women as well. But if we look at the 95 plus age group, the 90th percentile, for men, it's about $77,000. For women, it's $99,000. And if you move higher, the 95th percentile, the differences are even larger. So you can see at any age of death, there are significant differences between men and women. Okay. Okay, then, so in this slide, we are looking at how a nursing home stay affects a household's assets, their portfolio. So I will focus on the first two rows. And so it's divided by the number of nights a person spends in a nursing home. So the first row, it shows how the total wealth changed for this different group of people. And I'll again restrict just to the medians. So in the top row, so people who spend between 0 to 30 nights, the median assets were $108,000. And then when we move to 31 to 180 nights, the median drops to $67,000. And then who had really long stays of more than 180 nights, you can see the median drops just to $5,000, $5,500. So at that point, they have lived long enough, and so they deplete all their assets. Again, if you look at the second row, which is financial wealth, and restrict to the medians, you can see by the time it's 180 nights or more, they basically have no financial assets left at that point, right? And so again, to go back to the risk of for women, is that if in a couple, the husband has to move into a nursing home and stay long enough, so at that point, the household has exhausted most of their resources. And so when the husband dies, at that point, the surviving widow has very little left if the man has to spend long enough time in a nursing home. So that's another risk for women who live long enough. Okay. Okay, I think.
And that's why it's relative to us, because 70% of our are women, right, in CalSTRS, and so I think we think a lot about, that impacts women in significant ways, obviously, in terms of resources.
Yep. Yep. So these are some of the takeaways. I will not go through all of them because we have discussed most of it. I'll just mention a couple of points here. One that I did not go through in the slides. In the first, the main bullet, so you see we had also calculated annual expenses. So what I showed you was the cumulative throughout this period. We had calculated the annual out-of-pocket expenses, and the median for that was about $2,000 annually. And but the 95th percentile was at $19,000. So, and also if you look at the bottom, the last bullet in this slide, so here also we see that I did not have these numbers in the slides, but the risk of moving into a nursing home really increases with age. That's very intuitive. And so we see that in our data, people who died between 70 and 74, about 15% of them had to move into a nursing home for at least one night. And in the sample, in the age group of 95 and above, that number was 61%. So at that point, if you live long enough, there's a very high chance that you'll have to move to a nursing home. Okay. So yeah, so we have, I think, went through these conclusions, so I'll not spend more time on it. Okay, then we'll, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're now going to discuss the usage of different healthcare expenses and really separate out them into recurring and non-recurring. And I'll tell you the purpose of doing that. Again, this is another paper that my previous employer, IBRI, published, and the entire paper is available online at their website. Mm-hmm.
Questions from
the last paper?
Not on his.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So the reason for separating out these two kinds of services is really the difference in how you prepare for these kind of services, because so we said that the health insurance premiums are really predictable. So you look at them as a fixed expenditure item in your monthly budget. And we'll show you the numbers that even from the out-of-pocket healthcare expenses, there are some services for which the expenses really do not change throughout retirement. And the cost associated with those services, you can treat them as a fixed cost, fixed monthly cost. So you treat them like a utility bill that you have to pay every month. So that money really comes out of your regular monthly income flow, your Social Security check or your pension, because you have to incur the same amount every month. And the non-recurring healthcare expenses are the more risky, uncertain items for which you really can either self-insure by keeping your savings intact or by buying more insurance, like a long-term care insurance. So those are the basically two ways that you address that risk. Okay, so here you can see the usage of the different types of healthcare services. So you see that doctor visits and prescription drugs. So the use for this kind of services really do not change with age, and they have very high usage. So so in both cases, almost 90% of individuals in every age group are using those services, and that's very intuitive, right? And so, and dental services is also different from the rest. I mean, we see that the use of dental services goes down a little bit with age. Again, that's pretty intuitive. But the usage of those services are much higher than the rest of the other types of services. So what we do is we took dental services, prescription drugs, and doctor visits and coupled all of these as the recurring healthcare expenses. And I'll show you in the slides later that the expenses associated with these services are really stable and really do not change. All the other services, you can see the the usage of all the other kinds of services kind of go up with age, with the exception of outpatient surgery. And these are the services that we combine them as non-recurring healthcare expenses. Yeah, I already mentioned that. And okay, so these are the expenses, but I'll quickly move over to another slide to explain it better. So here we are looking at recurring healthcare expenses for singles only over a 2-year period. And you'll see in the middle row, we have the mean, which is the average, and I have the total recurring healthcare expenses on have circled out for the different age groups. Now you look at 65 to 74, the average is almost $2,500 over the 2-year period. From the next age group, 75 to 84, again, it's the same amount. The average is 2,500. And for the oldest group, 85 and above, it's slightly lower. Not the difference is not statistically significant. It's at $2,430. So you can see that over the different age groups, how the amount really does not change. So the monthly expenses associated with these services are also fixed. So if you have a prescription that you fill every month, you are more likely to pay the same amount every month. So that's what explains it. And same for if you go to a doctor. Yeah. And so in this slide, we are looking at the same recurring healthcare expenses. Now we're looking at couples. So if you again look at the averages, which is the middle row, and if you look at the total recurring healthcare expenses, you see that the numbers have almost doubled. So in the earlier slide, we had it almost close to $2,500. And here, most of the numbers are around the $5,000 mark. So really, it does not change with marital status either, right? So now we move into the other piece, which is non-recurring healthcare expenses. So here again, we will focus on the averages, and that's the middle row. And if you look in the left-hand side, we have age group 65 to 74. The average here of total non-recurring is about $2,800. And then we move to the next age group, 75 to 84. It has now moved up to $5,500. And we are looking at singles here in this slide. And when we look at the highest age group, 85 and above, now the average has increased to about $13,300. So clearly these numbers are going up with age. Okay. And the next slide, we'll look at the same non-recurring healthcare expenses, but for couples. So here you see for again, the average, which is the middle row, 65 to 74, it's about $2,000. The next age group, it moves up to close to $4,000. And the highest, the 85 plus age group, it's about $8,500. Now, I don't know if you noticed this or not, these numbers, so this is for couples, right? For two people combined. These numbers are lower than the numbers for the singles. If I go back to the earlier slide, so I'll just focus, say, on the 85 plus age group. So the total on the middle row on the rightmost side, the number we have is 8,500, right? If we go back, so for this age group, for the single household, then that is 13,500. So as a single, you're likely to spend more on these types of services. And the difference is really when you look at how much they are spending on these different services. It's in-home care, nursing home, and other care, which is, as I mentioned, adult daycare, transportation services, and all those kinds of services. So for singles, these numbers are much higher. So I'll take, say, just in-home care. So in this slide, it's about $5,300 for the 85 plus age group. If we move to the next slide, it drops down to $2,165, right? And the reason is what I mentioned earlier, is that when you are single, you do not have your spouse who is likely to act as a caregiver. So that's why these kinds of expenses go up when you become single. So, and that's again, going back to the same point about gender, that's a risk for women who are more likely to outlive their spouses. Okay. I think that's the end of the numbers that I have. Again, the implications, we have already discussed it. It's the main implication for looking at recurring and non-recurring is how you plan for these expenses. So for non-recurring, you have to either basically self-insure or buy additional insurance. And for other kinds of healthcare expenses, you should be able to kind of budget them from your monthly healthcare expenses. And they're not, that's the health insurance premiums and the recurring expenses are not really where the most uncertainty or the risk is. It's in non-recurring expenses. I think with that, yeah, I'll take any questions. Yeah, it's not a very uplifting topic. I'm sorry.
I think it is sobering, obviously. To think about some of this stuff, but it's important. And the reason why we wanted to hear from you and have your expertise is just to understand what many of our members are facing. And it's pretty clear from what I was just asked Dana, are most of our centenarians single women? I assume they are, and it sounds like, yes, they are. So I think that's always the demographic I'm thinking about in terms of just the extra impact on retirement security. So very sobering, and I hope the folks, in the audience who are members, healthcare is a huge issue. And,
Sure.
my brother's Canadian.
I have a couple data points on the kind of the demographic
Sure.
of our members.
Of our
as far
members?
as single
Would love to
men,
hear
women,
that,
kind
Tom.
of thing
Thank
in our
you.
retired population.
Sure.
So this comes from our retirement readiness data, and this is self-report data. So this is them telling us what their status was at the time of the research, which was last summer, basically. So this is a breakdown, men and women, our retired population, and here are the categories. So single, never married, so single their entire life. So men, 55%, and, I'm sorry, 7%, sorry, that's the absolute number.
I said 55%
Male, yeah,
of the
sorry.
men are never been married?
7% of retired males are
that sounds-
single, never married, and 9% for female. Married, currently, men, 73%, and women, 52%. Registered domestic partners, very small, it's less than 1% per each, roughly. Divorced, men, 12.5%, women, 23%. And then
Way too
widowed.
much time in our classroom, evidently.
So going back, what's interesting, actually, if you look at married men as actives, 71% of married men are still, or of active men are still married. And 61% of active females are married as actives. But then it drops 10% for women in retirement. Widowed is 6% for men and 15% for women. So just to get a sense of how the population breaks down relative to
Interesting.
the research here.
That's very helpful, Tom. Thank you for adding that. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming, Professor Benjer. We appreciate all the information. It was really helpful. Thank you. Thanks, you guys. Just looking at the hour, it's 5:30. I think we have one more piece, Andrew, with the customer service performance objectives. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Look, thank you so much, Matthew. Loretta, how could I not see you in the corner there?
Los Angeles. I wish the CalSTRS would do a survey, or maybe they've done it, and tell us how many districts pay for the retiree after 65.
Yeah. Do you know that,
Have,
Elisa?
for their health benefits.
Okay. Great.
After 65.
So community
Because
colleges and K
that's
through
the
12.
magic number where they drop them or keep them.
Thank you, Loretta. We might even have that information right now to give you instantly.
We have it from
We have it.
the triennial study that we presented
Okay.
last year. I think it was last year that we presented. And we do that, we pull those numbers once every 3 years
Okay.
because they do not change dramatically year to year. So even though the numbers are a little bit older, I think that they're still relevant. So for, I'm looking here, for retired, 84% of the retirees who are under 65 years of age have cost-sharing coverage from their employer. 85% or 84%. Only 33% of retirees over age 65 have cost sharing. And while that difference seems dramatic, it's a big number, that difference,
Very few districts.
and there's things to keep in mind. As people reach age 65, they have Medicare coverage. And then the cost of additional insurance goes down because those costs are adjusted because some of the medical expenses absorbed by the coverage from Medicare. So there's a lot of vulnerability in those under 65 years old if they don't have some source for cost sharing for benefits at that point.
Great. Anything else to add, Tom?
Yeah, and this also comes, so to complement that, this comes from our retirement readiness. This is the members telling us what their insurance coverage is after 65. And we offer them various categories, and this is how they answered. So it's about 9 different categories, but the first one is former employer pays the full cost for life. So for those over 65, that's 10% of them. My former employer pays full cost until 65, that was 7%. My former employer and I share the cost for life, that's about 8%. Former employer pays full cost until 65 and then we share, that's about 5%. I receive it through some other means, so it could be anything, a spouse, what have you, that's 13%. For those that work, a small proportion, 1% say that they actually receive it through their current employer. 25% say they pay the full cost. And then another 30% says rely solely on Medicare for their
So
coverage.
over half is full cost or Medicare, over half of that.
According to what they
Self-reported.
told us, yeah.
Okay. Thanks, you guys, as usual. I'd love to get I'd love to get the data to Ms. Tautenberger right away. So there you go, Loretta. And you can chat with staff afterwards if you want more about that. Sir?
I just want to check, I'm Chuck Denon from Placer County, a retired teacher. The statement was 84% of those under 65, is that retirees in CalSTRS are receiving cost benefit?
84% of retirees under the age of 65 have the opportunity to have shared cost for that insurance with their employer.
Well, I must have a strange area when only 1/3 of my people have health care between ages 55 and 65 if they retire. I think we need to make sure that that statistic does not mislead people.
Thank you. I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much, you guys.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry. Oh, goodness, there's lots of moving parts
That's
this
all right.
afternoon. It's 5:30. Dana?
The information the report we received from you was fabulous, but we really didn't talk about the report that you gave us on the Medicare premium payment program. And not that I want to do that now, but I did have several questions on it. I would like to have the opportunity to have you come back so we can discuss that. Is that possible?
Absolutely.
To
We
put
can
that on a
the-
future agenda?
Andrew, can we make sure we put that on the next benefits and services agenda?
Thank you.
And we can go over those details. That's, the program has a lot of details kind of sifting through the numbers to see who is part of that program and who is eligible. And we can review those details, absolutely.
Thanks.
Great.
So I have like
Thanks,
about 8 questions and comments, so it's like, now's not the time, but I want the opportunity to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'd be happy to, and we've
Thanks.
got all the stuff, so.
I
we-
knew
we-
you
Perfect.
would.
Perfect.
We'd be happy,
Thanks,
we'd be
Elisa.
happy to share all of that information.
Like
Thanks,
a
I
good
appreciate it.
researcher. Great, thanks so much. All right, Andrew. Customer service performance objectives. Just information item for us.
Okay, hello.
Hi.
So in terms of the customer service performance objectives, if you look at BNS 51, the annual chart is there for your consumption. Got my glasses on so I can read it now. And, in the written item, I sort of highlighted the fact that in fiscal year 17-18, we experienced one of our best years ever in terms of the overall performance on the objectives. And I sort of highlighted where some of the challenges were and kind of explained that. And so if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to drill down and talk about what your concerns may be or pass on any praise.
Dana.
So Andrew, just a couple of questions.
Okay.
I want to make sure I'm reading the graph right.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers within the graph are the goal. The percentages are the goal, correct?
Correct.
And so if it's green, we're good. If it's red, we didn't meet that percentage, correct?
Right, so those
All right.
are below target. Yellow's below target by a certain threshold, red and
And then
even lower.
red's much more. So then, in the write-up, we talked about changing our policy about accepting notification of death and actually
Correct.
receiving the death certificate. And it looks like for 17-18, the last 3 quarters, or last 4 quarters, no, last 3 quarters, and then fiscal year to date, we're having more difficulty getting the death certificate on time.
Right.
Did we do much about, or are we going to put out, I don't know, and it's so hard because what our publications go to the member, and these are deaths of members, so that message is not necessarily getting on to family. But are we trying to notify our members that we've changed that policy so that they can inform their caregivers or whatever that that's been a policy change and they need to get the death certificate in right away?
We have not yet done that, but we can certainly include that in a member, or probably more appropriate for a retired member, communication newsletter.
And I don't know if that actually gets passed on to the people that would need to provide it, but
Right.
maybe that's something that we could do that would help us meet that goal. And then if because we've changed that, do we need to drop our goals?
We're going to shift the goal, and so instead of notification of death, make it receipt of the death certificate so that it
Right.
matches business practice.
Right, I understand that's why
And
we're
then-
doing it, but then is the 68%, 70, 64, the 63, that's,
I believe we will keep it within 30 days of receipt of not a death notification, but a death certificate.
oh, I'm sorry, hang on a second. The target actually is, let me go back to that. So the numbers that are on the graph are what the percentages actually were, not what our goal is. There is the target. So our target for death certificates is 85. Is that too high?
So I'll respond to your question there. I wanted to address your earlier question about whether we're notifying members. We haven't started notifying, I'm Melissa Adams with Disability and
Melissa.
Survivor Benefits. We have not, as Andrew indicated, notified members about the change in process, but where we have modified our communication is to the beneficiaries. We always request a death certificate, but we are including that information in our initial phone calls, as well as emphasizing it in the initial correspondence that we send out. And then regarding the shift in the service level objective. We have made that change for the current fiscal year that started in July of 18, and we've modified it so that we're not measuring how long it takes from the time that we receive the notification of death, but we're measuring it from when we have the last necessary information. So our new target is to pay the benefits within 10 days of receiving, no, 30 days of the last necessary information.
Okay.
Does that answer your questions?
I think that does, yeah. Yeah. And then I have one more.
Go for it.
So Melissa, you might not want to be too far away. So the service credit purchase request completed within 25 days? No, that's not it. Member online self-service for account transactions. We have a 65% threshold, or that's what our target is. And the numbers are consistently, right around 50% or lower. So then my question is, have we changed that target? Or is the 65 an unrealistic goal?
We have not changed that target. We have sort of a ceiling in terms of what we're able to do internally, given the constraints of our pension administration system.
Okay.
So, our goal is to increase that number, and we're looking at some modifications we can do potentially around electronic signatures.
Which would then make that a lot
Potentially
more
boost
easy.
that.
Okay.
There's a lot more to it in terms of there's many things we need to consider when we think about electronic signatures, so it's more complicated than just flipping a switch. But this measure for this current fiscal year is still going to be at 65%. We recognize that is a stretch.
Want to ask about it next year? Just remind me.
We were one of the earlier systems that actually had an online application for service retirement, but we've been stagnant at 25% of our membership using it, even though if you think about it generationally, more and more people that are retired are used to online transactional work. So, I mean, we've debated this a lot, and we actually think the biggest impediment is the issue of the spousal signature and getting it more efficiently done. And there's ISO legal issues that we've all debated between parts of the organization. But as we look at other pension systems, they're having higher penetration rates on that than we are now. I mean, we were an early adopter, but now we're not where we want to be. So we've kind of set that as a short-term goal, is to try to get through this security legal issue so we can get that piece of it. To be sure, all used to, I know all of you've done real estate transactions with DocuSign, and there's a whole bunch of products out there where
No.
well,
Okay.
it's pretty common to do those. So if you think of our membership, anybody that's closed a real estate transaction is used to a very efficient process now electronically. So we don't have a comparable piece right now. So we've got to figure that out.
Is it an interactive form so they can fill it out on the computer and then just print it out and then the signature and send it in?
They could.
That's how it is now.
We don't want, no, they don't have to do that. We'd prefer they don't do that last piece. They can send it straight through electronically.
No, I understand that that's our goal, but right now, everything doesn't have to be handwritten. It can be actually filled out interactively on the computer, printed out, then with a physical signature and then sent in,
They
correct?
could do that.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
They could do that.
Any other questions?
Yep, I'm done. Thank you.
All right, Paul.
Thank you. So I have a few questions. So I see that our standard, our target for members expressing a high level of satisfaction with CalSTRS overall is 75%. Is there some kind of standard? I mean, is there a standard for insurance companies? Is there a standard for online? I mean, how do we pick 75%? Does Amazon have 75%? Does, Wells Fargo have 75%? Does a large life insurance company have 75%? How do we decide on 75%?
One is we tried to standardize our satisfaction rates around all of our product services, but Elisa really did the benchmarking on this. I think she's out with our guest in the hallway, but unless Andrew, you knew her original, but she really looked at our CEM data our benchmarking with other pension systems where they set those benchmarks.
So
Yeah.
it was,
But she can,
to some degree, it was based on what,
oh, it wasn't
other-
it's not one of those things.
right,
Yeah.
but so I guess, and so then I guess the question is 75%? I mean, there's the question of what's achievable versus what's desirable, and I don't know. I'm not quite sure where to come out with that, because I see that, we're actually don't quite make the 75%. So is there, we're 68% and 64% and 65%. So I'm not sure how to judge that. I don't know. See, in other words, I don't know whether to say that's good or that's not good. It's a number, but I don't understand how to interpret it. Can you see which one you're talking about again? Yeah, the very first one, members expressing a high level of satisfaction.
Overall.
What-
That's overall. Got it.
And why don't we have Elisa come back?
Yeah.
She's put so much research into that for us. I wouldn't mind having her.
Let me go on then to some other questions. How do we gauge this? Do we do, is it self-reporting that we ask members to report their satisfaction, and those who report, we record, and those who don't, so it's self-reporting. It's not a randomized survey like a election polling, which is so accurate, right? But I mean, it is at least theoretically supposed to be a more. Have we ever done anything like that where we've hired a survey research firm to just do
We actually have a survey research firm that does this with us.
But it's still self-reported as opposed to trying to choose a representative sample of people. In other words, if it's self-reported, we don't know whether it's skewed by, or maybe we do, whether it's skewed by age or by active versus retiree status, things like that. In other words, I guess maybe let me ask it another way. Are the respondents broadly representative of the whole range of characteristics of our membership? Maybe that's a better way to ask it.
So if you're talking specifically about the overall high satisfaction with CalSTRS, Elisa could speak better to that than I could. In terms of the business areas, for example, disability, members who are going through a disability process expressing a level of satisfaction with the service, we poll, I believe, each one of the members who go through that process, correct?
Yes, and there are different surveys for disability. It's very unique. We send a survey to each applicant whose application has been approved. We also send them to those who have been rejected. However, the rejected population, the response rate is far less than what we get from the approved population. But the approach that Elisa uses for the enterprise-wide survey is different.
And this is then just only representing our measurement of service performance objectives based on feedback from our members. This isn't any, for example, evaluation of quality control, whether we've done things, accurately or not. That would be a separate process, not what's reported here.
That'd be after our internal QA processes with the employees.
Okay.
Sampling phone calls, giving feedback to our employees on the quality work they're doing, that type of thing. Elisa's on the way, right? She's got quite a bit of research around all those questions. So
good.
Quite a lot of work goes into the methodology we use.
I would expect so. So that's why I asked the question of our expert staff.
And I have staff watching and texting me answers, actually. So it is a random sample, and Elisa does report on the satisfaction survey every year and goes down into the breakdown of a lot of these questions, and they do capture it by age group. So what we can see on those surveys, and Elisa can correct me when she gets here, but what we can see is the level of satisfaction relative to their age groups, and we see that those that are retiring or close to retirement are more highly satisfied in how they are engaged with the organization, because they're more attuned to where they are in life and how we what we're doing for them and how we're interacting with them, as opposed to the age groups that are in the early part of their career, and they're sometimes they don't know we exist, and they're kind of thinking about it, but their satisfaction is agnostic. They don't really have a perspective. And the random sampling that we do, we can see that the age groups that respond more are those that are going to be more active and more engaged and ready and closer to retirement. So those things are broken down in the survey when we do talk about the satisfaction survey.
Because it seems to me that helps to make the data useful for us, right? I mean, if we see that certain groups of members are more satisfied than others, then those that aren't as satisfied, maybe that tells us we've got some issues to address with them. And so that, rather than it's just being reporting one large number.
Right.
Here. Come on up, Elisa. Why don't you go ahead and.
Thanks, Melissa.
You're indispensable. We need your. So, can you reiterate Paul? Do you want to reiterate, or we can have staff reiterate?
Well, I think I got some of my questions answered, but maybe the one that hasn't been answered was how do we? And I'm looking particularly at the members expressing a high level of satisfaction with CalSTRS overall, and our target is 75%. Is that a bench? Where does that come from? That number? Why isn't it 60% or 85% or how do we evaluate it? Do we think 75% is good or I'm trying to get it's a number. I'm trying to get a context for it.
Okay. I will try to provide some context. So target setting is a bit of an art, as you probably already know that. 75% is a number that has been the standard at CalSTRS since I think even before my time. And there are a lot of professional recommendations around target setting, one of which is to set your target high, but not excessive. So you look at the resources that are necessary to achieve a certain target, and you want to clearly, right? If we're chasing something, it's important, and to get to 100%, each increment as you get closer to 100% usually requires more resources. So 75% is the target that we have. The reason that it seems reasonable is that it's higher than where we are usually at. So it keeps, it keeps some energy around achieving, and yet it's not so out of reach that people give up because there's that element to it. When you ask whether 75 is good or not, I think you have to look a little deeper at the metric, and the metric is around 75% giving 6 or 7 scores, which are the highest. It's a 7-point response scale, and 6 and 7, it's 75% hit 6 and 7s. Now, when I say 75% is good, I'm going to give some caveats to that. If you have 75% people saying, I'm high agreement that this is great service, and 25% saying, I'm having a terrible situation, then no, 75% probably isn't good. In our situation, our data is skewed to the right, where the majority of our responses are in the 6 and 7, and a tiny number are in those low end of the scores. And there's another point with target setting is you actually want to get, it's not just achieving the number, but getting information from collecting the data that helps you direct your efforts and your resources to what's important. So what we can see when we look at our data and we look at the spread on that particular scale is that the majority of, and I think our numbers run around, is it around 58%? I'm looking at this in front of me. 65. So we're looking right around 65%. The majority of the other 35% tend to be in the mid-range. And what that tells us is is that we have a large number of people who are quite neutral about us. And I think I'm presenting on this in November. I actually am going to cover this in detail, and what I'm going to show you is individual members' responses that tell why they gave those particular scores. And do you want the little preview? No. Okay, I'll save it. I'll save it for November then.
In November, it is 6 o'clock now. So I'm
But
sure
I'll try to tie it
people
back
aren't
to this.
appreciating a lot more questions at this point.
I'll try to tie it back to this conversation when I present in November. I think that the data that we're getting from tracking this particular performance score is very informative to help us direct ourselves in terms of the products and services that we're trying to deliver and the way that we're trying to deliver them.
Wonderful, thank you.
And I will say too, that each of the individual business areas that conduct satisfaction surveys, our business areas work very closely with Elisa and her team to make sure that all of the satisfaction surveys have the appropriate element of consistency.
Okay.
Great, thanks, Lisa. All right, anything else, Andrew?
Okay, any other questions?
You're out? No?
I'm
Okay.
out.
Okay.
I'm
I
good.
don't see any other questions or comments from board members, but we'll make sure to tie back some of what Paul's bringing up in Elisa's presentation in November. So I think it's always a good question, like what do those numbers mean? And how should we as board members interpret them? What does that mean for us? All right, so we've got the review of our committee charter. Did you want
Are
to?
there any changes, amendments, additions that you would like to make to the charter?
I didn't see anything.
There are none recommended by staff.
Okay. So, and that's an information item, so seeing no input from the committee. All right, so we'll move on to that, and your executive officer report, Andrew.
So the update, I was going to introduce some of our change champions and sort of, but just in the interest of time and where we're at in the day, I think I'd like to move that, with your permission, to November. And just cover a couple of other items in the BSEO update for November.
Thanks, Andrew. You're reading our, okay. Information requests. Do we have anything, Scott?
Yes, I had two. One was what disclosures CalSTRS provides to members if and when they leave CalSTRS. And the second was for a potential future BNS agenda item, a request for further info for the MPP.
Okay. So I was gonna, thanks Scott, but I actually made a little bit of a list for November, so and I'll add to what you added. So I just wanna make sure we're on the same page with, so looking at item 10, which is the draft agenda for November, we're going to be adding Dana's request about Medicare, right? Having Elisa and Tom come back. She left us again. Oh, she's back there. So to address that, you're gonna introduce the change champions because we love to meet the movers and shakers of our organization. Yes. And then what are there other additions to the agenda?
Not that I'm aware of.
I think that's it. Okay.
Okay.
So you see the agenda for November, and we will get that great report. It's our annual, what's the annual member satisfaction survey?
Correct.
Is what Elisa will hopefully answer all of Paul's questions on that one. All right. Opportunities for statements from the public. Are you guys still around?
Yeah.
5 to 6. Anyone want to say anything from the public? Seeing none, we will adjourn benefits and services for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And we'll start, I think Harry will start investments tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. So we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.